My fellow Americans, thank you for attending this State of the Union address on this date, January 28th, 2014. I'm Jon Roland. No, I am not the President of the United States, although I'm eligible to be, unlike some people. I am going to speak to you tonight about the problems that confront our nation, the state that it's in, and how we can move forward to a better future. First, I need to give you the bad news. We are in a very bad situation. I think most of you know that. Most politicians won't tell you that, at least not just before an election. They want to tell you that they've got things under control, that they know what they're doing, and I'm here to tell you that no, we don't know what we're doing. Congress doesn't know what it's doing. The President doesn't know what he's doing. The courts don't know what they're doing. We're just winging it and hoping for the best. The job of the President is expressed in his oath of office: to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign or domestic. I have to regretfully inform you, if you didn't already know, that the current President and the previous several occupants of that office have not been fulfilling that duty. They have not been defending the Constitution as it was originally understood and meant. They've allowed the practices of Congress, the executive branch, and the courts to wander far from the Constitution as it was intended to be enforced. There are many reasons for that. But unfortunately, most of them come down to the fact that you, the people, have not done your job of demanding that your public servants comply with the Constitution. You have not made it the leading issue in every election. Instead, too many of you demand benefits from government, usually without consenting to paying for any of them. That has to stop. And as President, it would be my program to stop them. Many of you would not like that. In fact, many of you would probably not vote for me for that reason. Well, I'm not here to tell you why you should vote for me. I'm here to tell you why you should support what I'm telling you, and if you don't support it, then you're going to be in a very bad way, and so will the rest of us. Now, the single biggest problem confronting our country is what is sometimes called the debt crisis. It is sometimes misrepresented as merely a matter of government deficits. That's part of it, the leading contributing factor. But the main problem is that we have built an economy on the basis of debt. We've been borrowing what we call money, and it's not really money, we just call it that, and people are foolish enough to accept it in payments for goods and services. But we've been borrowing it, and when we can't pay the loans back, we've been creating more money out of thin air to pay the interest and the principal on those loans. And we've been doing that. It's not only government that's been doing that, the private sector has been doing it as well. And the private financial sector has been speculating, creating highly complex, speculative financial instruments, which they trade, and all of which are based upon debt that vastly exceeds what will ever be possible to pay off. They are able to continue doing that because they create more currency out of thin air and pump it into the financial sector so that it can grow and seem to show a profit when in fact it's not showing a profit, real profit at all. Because someday that process is going to falter, and when it does, it's all going to come crashing down. I think most of you understand that. You may not want to think about it, but I'm here to encourage you to think about it, because we are not going to get out of this one easily. We are not going to tax our way out of it. We're not going to spend our way out of it. We're not going to borrow our way out of it. And we're not going to grow our way out of it. Because the fundamental problem is not that there is not enough capital to create enough jobs to employ everyone. There's plenty of capital to do that. The problem is that it is not a good investment to invest that capital in creating jobs. There are better ways to invest it at a higher rate of return. There are simply not enough ways to employ people to make things or make services that enough people are going to be willing to pay to buy. If people won't pay for things, it makes no sense to invest in producing them. So for the foreseeable future, we not only will probably not see sufficient growth in jobs, but we may actually begin to see a decline. The good news is that most of those offshore jobs are coming back. The bad news is that when they do, they will be done by machines. We are making rapid progress with new technology that will displace human workers. We automated farming, we mechanized mining, we mechanized manufacturing, we're increasingly mechanizing services, including white-collar jobs. What we are increasingly being left with is only a few low-skilled jobs that pay not enough to support a family, or jobs for highly paid professionals. We are eliminating the jobs in between, and with it, the middle class. A lot of politicians will tell you that they're going to try to protect the middle class. Well, unfortunately, they're not going to be able to do that. And they're lying to you if they say that. You need to face the fact that unless you own a machine, in the future, you're not going to have a revenue stream. That's just the way it is. And you're probably not going to own a machine. So, we are facing a grim future, and it's not going to get better for your children or grandchildren. We have reached what is probably the peak of prosperity as far as ordinary human beings are concerned. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be economic growth by several measures. The economy, however, can go on and grow by itself and leave human beings behind. Can leave them in the dust. Leave them to try to make a living by scrounging through solid waste dumps, but not to live in a manner that most people would consider satisfactory. Now, of course, As long as the economy is producing a surplus, there will be demands and some capability to meet the demand for consumption by simply subsidizing people. That's what we've been increasingly doing. A large part of the people of this country are being subsidized. Even those who have jobs are being subsidized in part. So it's not just a matter of 47% or some other such number of those who are dependent on government. To one extent or another, almost all of us are dependent on government. And government is not going to be able to continue to do that. It can pay its bills by printing more money. But when that money fails to continue to inflate the financial sector is going to collapse, and all that money is going to come flooding into the commodity sector, the equity sector, and inflate all of the prices for everything else we need. So don't be too surprised if tomorrow morning you wake up and your bank will no longer honor any of your checks or allow you to make any cash withdrawals, and suddenly there's a run on the banks, on the supermarkets, and on everything else around you, people scrambling to get the last remaining supplies that they need to survive, and discover that they run out within a few weeks, never to have those supplies replenished again, except through barter. It's going to be very important to have personal control over your own wealth. That means land, it means tools, it means the solid things you can put your hands on, that you can store, that you can carry, that you can trade with. Because we, human beings, are going to be going to a barter economy. I can't say how soon that will happen, but it's very likely to break loose within the next 4 years. Hopefully it could take longer. It could happen tomorrow. We just don't know, and no one knows. Anyone who tells you he knows is a fool or a liar. So, what do we do about this? Well, first of all the things that we would have needed to do to avoid this situation needed to have been done more than 40 years ago. We are past the point where we can simply, but through some combination of magical policy decisions, escape from it. We are like the cartoon character Wile E. Coyote, who runs off the edge of the cliff and who hangs in midair for a while before looking down and discovering that there's nothing supporting him, at which point he plummets to the canyon below. We are all in the position of Wile E. Coyote. We have already run off the cliff, we just don't know it yet. And if you take seriously what I'm telling you here tonight, you will, in fact, fall off that position of floating in midair, along with everyone else. So I'm sorry to say, this speech, if taken seriously, is likely to precipitate the very disaster that we're facing. But the fact is that it's better to precipitate it now than to drag it out until the point where it will be even worse. We face not only another Great Depression, but remember that the last Great Depression resulted in a world war. And we didn't have nuclear weapons until the very end of that war. Now we have almost 20 countries with nuclear weapons, varying numbers of them, and you have to ask yourself, what are the odds that if there's another depression worse than the one of the 30s, what are the odds that no nation will ever use any of those nuclear weapons? And if one does, what are the odds that they won't suddenly all break loose and send everything they've got at everyone they think might be a threat? So this is not just a matter of economic well-being, this is a matter of survival. We could easily lose more than 6 billion of the 7 billion people now on the planet. And that would mostly be people in the so-called developed countries. So it's going to be rough if that happens. The preppers are right. You need to prepare. And you won't be able to prepare for everything. So better to get started now. Now, this is the situation in which we find ourselves. Let's examine some of the other problems that result from failing to comply with the Constitution. It's not just that we get big government that is too large to be supervised, too large to manage. It is that we get a mounting injustice of all kinds by government abusing people's rights and denying them remedies for those abuses. We have hundreds, perhaps thousands, depending on how you count them, of federal criminal statutes that are not authorized by the Constitution. 95% of all the legislation passed by Congress in the last 20 years is unconstitutional. And as president, I will not enforce it. And if Congress or the courts insist that I do so, I will ignore them. Because I have to make my own judgments as to what is and is not constitutional. And if I find that a statute is, or even a court order, is unconstitutional, I will ignore it. And I will do what the Constitution requires, not what they require. So that's going to produce a very controversial situation. Now, what is the need that we have for the public in this situation? Well, first of all, you're going to need to support my efforts to return us to constitutional compliance. You have to put aside your private concerns about making a living and unite in helping to govern this country. You're going to have to replace most of the people who are now in government, in every branch at every level. The ones that are in government now are too entrenched, they're too devoted to their own interests and those of their cronies to ever reform. They might reform later after they've been out of power for a while, and we could consider them on a case-by-case basis at that time. But in the meantime, almost all the positions in government are going to have to be replaced. That means that with few exceptions, you need to elect a complete new set of members of Congress. You need to elect new governors, new state legislators. You need to elect a complete new set of almost everyone. And don't be fooled by people who tell you that they are devoted to the Constitution. They need to at least be able to demonstrate that they know what the Constitution requires of us and what it forbids of us. And if they cannot engage in a competent, detailed discussion of every provision of the Constitution, then you should not vote for them. So everyone needs to hit the books to understand the Constitution as it was understood and meant, and that is not going to be easy. It has taken me more than 50 years. It's going to take almost anyone at least 20. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have to get on with it. So, what is the first thing we need to do? Well, I have several websites which I personally maintain, in which I've set forth the constitutional amendments that need to be made, the bills that need to be passed in Congress, detailed bills that I need your support to get introduced and to pass. You'll notice that these are on my personal websites, or at least my private organization's websites, because I don't trust the government to maintain a website, and you shouldn't either. So you look for them on my websites, constitution.org, jonroland.net, that's JONROLAND.net. Look for proposed bills, and you can see the actual legislation ready to drop in the hopper. Now you're going to have to get after your members of Congress to introduce that legislation and to manage its way through Congress. Some of those bills are to introduce constitutional amendments. Similar bills can be written and need to be written for each state. So it's going to be a lot to do for us over the next several months and years. But if we get on with it, if by moving forward on the needed reforms we have to make, we may in fact stave off the collapse that I'm warning about. Because if enough people feel that they have work to do to turn this situation around, as enough people did when World War II started. When World War II started, it was not the spending on armaments or war material or the actual conduct of war operations that turned around the economy. It was people with a mission. They now had a mission to fight the war, and having that mission, they turned the economy around. So what we need now is for all of you to develop a sense of mission that can turn the situation around simply by changing expectations, changing demands, and changing the way we work together. So, that is the plan I have laid out for you. Remember, you won't find this on a government website. You find it on my websites, at least until some government agency tries to shut them down. So I am done now. You'll notice that I'm not speaking from a teleprompter. I don't need a teleprompter. I speak extemporaneously, which means that all of you who may have been expecting to see a printed speech before this address is being given are just going to have to wait until you see a printed version taken from this oral version. That's the way I do things. And I encourage everyone else to learn how to do the same, because the day when we simply read what other people have written, it needs to end. We need to do our own thinking, our own writing, and we need to get it right. So with that, I bid you good evening, and good luck to us all. Thank you.